Truck driving. A seemingly monotonous career where you spend hours and hours behind the wheel of a big rig, bouncing from state to state, delivering whatever it is to whatever city that needs it. But spend enough hours behind the wheel and the road starts doing things to you. That narrow tunnel of headlights becomes the only thing between you and whatever the darkness is hiding. The feeling of passing something in the dark only to later realize that it wasn't your imagination at all. The open road is isolated and full of darkness and strangers. Today, we are diving into the world of trucking and the horrors that only truck drivers could experience. As always, remember to like, comment, rate, and follow, as that helps me out a lot. Now let's begin. I'm your host, Michael Messerly, and this is Scary, but True. Christmas of 2007 was an event that always stood out in my mind, and now it always will. I was 13 at the time, and that was the first and only year that Dad missed Christmas. He worked as a long-haul truck driver, and we were used to him being gone for weeks or even occasional months at a time. He always made it a point to be home for our birthdays and Christmas, however, but that year was different. Mom was worried when he said he had one final load to deliver before the holiday season. His plan was to make his delivery and then be home on the 23rd just in time for Christmas. But Mother Nature had other ideas. As fate would have it, his route from our home in Minneapolis to Billings, Montana would take him right into the heart of a looming blizzard along I-94. Snow was falling in bunches at the time, and Dad said he was debating whether or not to pull over for the night in hopes it would clear up. He decided to try and just keep going when the road made the decision for him. He was only about an hour away from Billings when his truck struck an unexpected patch of ice, causing him to lose control and slide off the road into the median. Thankfully, he wasn't injured, but his truck was wedged in nearly 2 feet of packed snow. It was around midnight when this happened. He tried everything he could to get the truck out of the snowdrift, but it was no use. Of course, his phone signal was non-existent as well, so he couldn't even call for assistance. The roads were virtually devoid of other travelers by that point as well. He radioed in to a local emergency office, but was told the roads were too hazardous to travel at the moment. In the end, he could do nothing but wait. Meanwhile, Christmas came and went for us, and we didn't hear anything from Dad. Mom was a nervous wreck, although she tried to hide it, while me and my 2 sisters were just sad that he wasn't there with us. Thankfully, Dad finally called late on Christmas evening. He apologized profusely for not being with us and promised he would get home as soon as possible. He did just that 2 days later, and we were relieved to see him back. He returned with a bundle of late Christmas gifts, and all was well once more. Dad was different though. He was quiet and appeared as though his mind was focused elsewhere. I didn't question him on it, but I could tell that something was troubling him. Life went on, and Dad never missed another Christmas after that. In fact, he began taking the entire month of December off to prevent anything like that ever happening again. I didn't know this at the time, but he later told me that he never drove down I-94 again. He outright refused deliveries that took him along that stretch and would take detours to add multiple hours to his trip if it meant avoiding that spot. Us kids are all grown up now, with kids of our own. My son just turned 2, and our whole family was once again together over this previous Christmas. We sat down watching as Mom and Dad lovingly spoiled their grandchildren with goodies. I don't think I've ever seen my dad with such a beaming smile. Later that night, when the sugar rush had finally worn off and the kids had gone to bed, Dad and I were left alone on the balcony. We sipped some of his whiskey and puffed on cigars as we got to talking. Eventually, we started talking about his newfound retirement from truck driving, and I asked him a question which I never really asked before. You ever experience anything really creepy on the road? Dad was no stranger to talking about his experiences. He had infamous tales of him getting mobbed by crackheads in Atlanta, hitting a cow in Nebraska, and the things he saw while driving through Ferguson a few years back during the civil unrest. He was never shy to tell them, but this time, he paused. He swished the whiskey around in his glass for a moment, as if silently debating whether he wanted to tell me. I guess I might as well tell you now. He downed the remainder of his drink and clasped his hands in front of him. You remember the year I missed Christmas? By this point, I'd almost entirely forgotten about it, but when he said that, a torrent of memories came spiraling back. Yeah, Mom was pissed, I replied. Dad gave a hearty chuckle and nodded. Oh yeah, she never let me forget it. That was that crazy blizzard, right? When your truck got stuck? Dad nodded. Yep. Damn near flipped my rig that night. Ironically, the snowdrift probably saved my life just as much as it screwed me over. He then paused and broke eye contact as he contemplated his wording. That wasn't the scary part, though. Dad explained that the area he went off the road was essentially a barren wasteland. No cities or gas stations around him, just a winding expanse of road in both directions between dozens of foothills. He again mentioned he had no cell reception and wasn't sure what to do aside from just wait for someone to pass by. After a few minutes, it became apparent that wasn't going to happen. The snow fell in buckets that night, and before long, it nearly reached the bottom of his door. Dad's truck at the time was a Cascadia 125, mid-roof sleeper. He had a full sleeping compartment behind the front seat and provisions to last him a few weeks if necessary. He wasn't too worried about being stranded, at least not at first. After giving up on getting his phone to work, he crawled into the bunk area of the cab and popped in a DVD in his portable TV. He figured he may be stuck out here for at least the night, so he might as well just relax until help arrived. He made sure to insist that if he wanted to, he could have probably figured out a way to get his truck out if he really did. But he was exhausted and decided just to get some sleep. He said he drifted off not long after, only to awake sometime later to complete darkness. The temperature had plummeted, and he instinctually hugged his arms and felt the goosebumps lining his arms. He left his truck idling before he fell asleep, but it wasn't running anymore. Confused, he crawled into the front seat to find the keys still in the ignition. He twisted the key, and the engine soon rumbled back to life. But something was wrong. He said the noise of the engine morphed into a gurgling, clanging mess of metal and fluid that produced a god-awful cacophony. His dashboard lit up like a Christmas tree, displaying just about every single warning light the system had. Steam began to pour from the hood vents, and the distinct smell of boiling coolant filled the air. After letting it run maybe 10 seconds, he shut it off in fear of doing permanent damage to it. He knew that something wasn't right with it and sighed as he contemplated going out into the cold night to see if he could figure out what it was. He bundled himself up tight and popped the hood. He said the night had this almost ethereal silence to it as he stepped out of the cab. His feet crunched in the snow, echoing like crashing thunder when compared to the pervasive silence. He made his way around the front and opened it up, releasing a plume of steam from within. After it dissipated a bit, he leaned in and found something which made him quite confused. Oil and coolant was splashed all over the underside of the hood, with many other parts of the engine covered in gunk as well. Dad climbed off the grill and glanced underneath the carriage, and that's when he found something truly odd. The oil pan was shredded on the bottom of the engine. He said it looked as though someone had chopped it up with an axe a couple dozen times. The oil had all spilled out into the snow beneath. Clearly, that's why the engine had been running so rough, but explaining how it happened was another matter entirely. He checked around the area and said it seemed like some of the oil was dripped away from the road and towards the trees. He looked closer and spied what very much seemed like footprints accompanying them. As if the winter night wasn't cold enough, that discovery really tanked his blood temperature. He quickly headed back towards his cab, but as he reached for the handle, something stopped him dead in his tracks. Something moved behind the end of his trailer, too quick to make out any physical details. It moved on two legs and was clearly no animal. Dad just froze, his fight or flight instincts seeming to stalemate within him. He thought about calling out, but said that didn't seem like a good idea. After a few seconds of silence, he made a mad dash to his cab and locked the doors behind him. After grabbing the pistol from underneath his seat, he hopped into the rear with his heart racing. He positioned himself where he was able to glance out both side mirrors, but saw no sign of whoever was behind the trailer. The radio, too, was out, and after trying in vain to get it to work, he sat back. It didn't make any sense to him. Even if the engine wouldn't fire up, the batteries should have had enough reserve charge to power the radio for a little while. He tried calling on his business cell phone too, and although managed to get it to ring a few times, it would always just cut out. Hours passed, and not much of anything happened. He dozed off once or twice, but tried his best to stay awake and wait for the sun to rise. The snow had since stopped, but not a single other car had driven by since he had stopped. He figured the pass itself was closed, but hoped someone would have been by. Sometime later, he heard a noise emanate from outside. It started as a slight thump, with another soon following, and then another, and another. The sounds gradually grew louder, and his heart lodged in his throat as it grew nearer. Someone was on his trailer, and he didn't know what to do about it. He clutched his pistol tight, aiming it up towards the roof. Just as he was certain the person was about to reach the roof of his cab, the sound stopped. He waited there, pistol trembling in his grip, for them to emerge, but they never did. Minutes turned to hours, and he never heard another sound from the roof. He said after a while he was no longer even sure whether he had heard anything to begin with. Eventually, his guard slipped, and the drowsiness took over. He doesn't know if this next part is related, but he's never had anything happen like it, so I figured I'd include it too. He dreamed as he slept there, but it wasn't a normal dream. He said he remembers walking through a dark forest and viewing it all with incredible, vivid detail. He was completely lucid and says to this day, almost 30 years later, that it was the most incredibly realistic dream he's ever had. Even looking back on it, he says it felt so real it's hard for him to distinguish it from reality. He seemed genuinely disturbed as he told me about this. The forest he was walking through had these massive, looming trees that seemed hundreds of feet tall. Twisted roots surrounded their bases, which sprouted them from the ground and twisted all over like the tentacles of the kraken. He had to dip and duck around them as he moved, going further but not knowing why. As he made his way through, he started hearing this noise like the ticking of a clock. It got louder as he moved, then sure enough, he found the source. A large grandfather clock ticking away in the middle of the bundle of roots. He stopped and stared at it for a moment as it ticked away. The clock's tone reverberated but began to slow. In a few moments, it had began ticking much slower, and the clock itself began to melt. Suddenly, he saw things emerging in the distance from behind the trees. Horrible, twisted creatures like the spawns of hell. The sounds of cackling and snarling swirled around him, and he began to run. He hurtled and leapt through the roots, but didn't make it far. Something struck him hard from behind, knocking him onto his chest. He then awoke with a gasp, panting heavily with a cold sweat permeating his entire body. He scrambled to a seated position while on the brink of panic. His heart was throbbing so fast and hard that it ached. He took a moment to compose himself, and the immense relief that overcame him was one of sheer relief. But it did not last. Something moved at his window, and his eyes shot up. There, he saw the face staring back at him. He froze, as stiff as a corpse and as cold as a glacier. Time seemed to stand still then. But finally, he found the strength to raise his pistol. He fired without even really thinking. A loud bang reverberated, and the muzzle flare momentarily disoriented him. He looked up to see a bullet hole in the window and no sign of the face. After waiting there a few moments, he ventured to the driver's seat and peered out, but there was nothing there. No sign of that thing ever being there. It made zero sense to him, as he was certain he saw it. What made even less sense was the fact that his phone read that it was only 12:13 a.m. Last he remembered checking his phone, it read 12:08 a.m. And he swears on everything that had to have been at least an hour before he dozed off. By this point in his story, I had to question myself on whether he was pulling my leg. My father is a bit of a prankster for sure, but he's never weaved an elaborate story like this before. He then spent some time glancing around out the windows and ensuring no one else was around. He almost thought he should just leave his truck behind and start walking back to town, but obviously that was an incredibly dangerous notion that probably would have gotten him killed. He stared at his phone for a while, watching the minutes slowly tick onward, too slowly. He swore time wasn't working as normal. Several times he counted aloud to 60, doing his best to approximate a minute, but the minute didn't change accordingly. He eventually just kept counting upwards, finding the minute finally changed when he reached 386. You'd think that after all these worrying discoveries, that sleep would have been the last thing he wanted, but it wasn't enough to prevent. He said he tried adamantly to resist the urge, but the drowsiness that overtook him was impossible to fight. He found himself walking in the snow, listening as it crunched beneath his feet. A dark and silent forest surrounded him in all directions. It was robotic, as if his body acted of its own accord while his mind drifted in the doldrums. He could barely see where he was going, but it didn't seem to matter. Suddenly, he stopped, and he seemed to spring back to reality. He glanced around, side to side, a sudden terror gripping him. Where was he? Why was he outside of his truck? He wondered. He spun back, but couldn't even see the road behind him. The cold sunk into him, and then he saw it. From further in the woods, a familiar face stared back. Pale, gaunt, and inhuman. It crawled on all fours, shimmering and shifting side to side. My father turned the complete other way and ran like hell. Tree branches raked against him as he fled half blind away from the thing in the woods. Nothing looked familiar, and he just continued running aimlessly through the woods, checking behind him periodically to see if the thing was following him. He never saw it or heard it, but he knew it was there. Eventually, he smelled the faint scent of smoke lingering in the air. He followed it, hearing a commotion behind him, and soon came across a small clearing. In the center of it was a log cabin with smoke trickling from the chimney. Seeing no other option, he dashed towards it and knocked on the door. Behind him, he could hear odd sounds coming from the woods, and thankfully, the door opened a few seconds later. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice of an elderly man called from within. Dad turned and saw the barrel of a shotgun aimed at his chest. He slowly raised his hands to convey he meant no threat. "Please, sir, He said. He paused, as he thought that certainly this man was going to think he was some lunatic, but he said it anyways. "There's something out there." The man's furious glance reverted to one of intrigue. He then looked past my dad and out into the forest, his eyes suddenly growing wide. He backed up, still aiming the shotgun at my dad while waving him inside. He pointed him over to a chair in the corner. Dad complied and sat as the man locked up behind him. He waited there a couple of seconds, but apparently heard nothing of concern. "What are you doing out here?" My dad then told him what had happened with his truck in the blizzard. He then told him about the odd occurrences that had happened later on, which culminated in him suddenly sleepwalking through the woods. The man sighed and finally lowered his shotgun. My dad got some water and took a seat across from him. "A lot of weird things in these woods." Dad paused as he waited for the man to continue. The man formally introduced himself as Duncan and said his family had owned that plot of land for over nearly 100 years. He said he'd lost count of how many search parties had come through over the years, as well as thrill seekers, ghost hunters, and generally odd people. "I saw a face," Dad finally confessed to him. Duncan eyed him curiously. "What kind of face?" Dad described it as much as he had before, and Duncan just shook his head. "Well, that's a new one." He let out a sarcastic chuckle. "You hear of all kinds of stories, UFOs, Bigfoot, cults, but none of them can ever provide proof." "So you don't believe in any of it?" my dad asked, only to be countered by Duncan. "Of course I do. I've lived out here long enough to know that we humans do not dictate these woods. There are things that lurk in the shadows all over the globe, and we may never understand them." Thankfully, Duncan allowed my dad to stay the night, and in the morning, the two of them made their way back to the road. Luckily, Duncan had a big Dodge diesel that was able to plow through the snow with relative ease. They soon reached my dad's abandoned rig, finding it in even worse state than he'd last seen it the previous night. Multiple tires were slashed, windows were broken, and the engine was absolutely shredded from the bottom. After looking around though, he found nothing had actually been stolen. Duncan gave him a ride into town to get his truck towed, and a week or so later, he was finally headed home. He eventually told me that between the time of him crashing his truck to when he finally made it into town with Duncan, that 3 entire days had passed. He still doesn't know how to account for that, and apparently Duncan didn't either. There's a lot of unanswered questions to this that he may never get the answer to now. He kept in touch with Duncan over the years, but unfortunately he passed away back in 2019. I love my dad, and it's disconcerting seeing him that way, confused and terrified. I cannot completely attest to the validity of his story, but I believe him. For many who read this, I'm sure it will just amount to words on a paper, or maybe a fictitious story that entertained you for a few minutes. But to me, it's a horrific possibility at the very least. If anyone has experiences like this, or theories, then feel free to share them. Whatever the case, you won't catch me anywhere near I-94 in Billings anytime soon. If you're enjoying Scary But True, please remember to leave a like, comment, and a rating wherever you're listening. Also, be sure to follow so you never miss an episode, and it really helps me out. Thank you so much for listening. Now back to the episode. In 2003, I had met a guy that said he would take me on adventures and make my life exciting. Little did I know that the safe world I had grown up with was about to get shattered. I lived in a small town and had never really traveled outside of my state, never experienced life in a way that others would. We were kind of sheltered from the big crime and other things that have been happening over my countryside. So my now ex decided to take me on a journey of being an over-the-road truck driver. In a lot of cases, this was a great experience. There were a lot of fun times and I got to see most of the US, but trucking life is hard, and being on the road 24/7 is not easy. Being cooped up in a small truck with someone for that long will cause anyone to become mad. Life on the road is much different now than it was when I was trucking. People now have advancement in technology and the ability to binge watch your favorite YouTube channel, surf the web, or play games on your phone to keep yourself occupied. The only forms of entertainment we had was either watching one of the dozen or so DVDs, reading yet another book, or talking on the radio. We often opted for talking on the radio, and this became our version of social media, long before Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter were even a thought. Just like we do now, we create a different identity or persona to hide behind while interacting with people who are basically strangers. And trust me, truckers can be creepy. Keeping a bit of anonymity is the only way to stay safe on the road. When you're a trucker, you acquire a CB handle. My ex's was Ninja Dwarf, changed for his safety. And me, since I was a baby, barely 20 years old, and I'm from Alaska, so mine ended up being Northern Exposure, again, changed for safety reasons. During the time on the road, you meet a lot of crazy people, and you see a ton of crazy stuff. And I do mean a ton of crazy stuff. People often hear about stories of things that happen on the road. Most of them are more gross than scary. You know, like drivers getting a little too friendly with their cabin buddy, whether it be a dog, cat, or even goat. But this time was one of the most terrifying experiences I had in my life. And when it comes to strange and unusual events, my life is full of them. Have you ever gotten the heebie-jeebies from someone's voice? Like flat out scared to talk to someone? A voice that makes you think that the person on the other line is not all there? That was this guy. Something about him just made my skin crawl, and I had only ever heard his voice through the crackle of the CB radio. The CB started to crackle, and we heard a distant call. You could barely hear a voice through the static, but eventually he got close enough we could hear him clearly. He must have been 50 miles or so behind us because it was still faint, but our CB radio was peaked and tweaked and could really reach out and touch someone. So we could just hear him through the chatter of the CB. And then I heard it, that voice. It's hard to explain. The best way I could now describe it would be like how Heath Ledger talks as Joker in the Batman movie. There was just something off about it, and it gave me the chills. He simply said, "Hey there, Purple Pete. Where you headed?" My ex hollered back we were heading to Arkansas. The driver said he was going the same way and asked if he could tag along with us and introduce himself as Maniac. We would run from one coast to the other and back again. The guy always seemed to be running the same route as us, but we had never really physically seen his truck. He described it as a 378 long-nosed Peterbilt that was black and had a brow and cattle guard. According to him, he ran dry box from California to Florida, which explained why he always seemed to be either coming or going on the I-10. One week, when we were running from Florida back to LA, we caught up to him on his back trip from Redmond, Washington to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He told us he would meet up with us in Nevada when we did our trip back because by that time, we would have ran out of hours and needed to take a rest. We said sure, even though I totally didn't want to meet this guy. My ex had some friends with him, so we gave him an ETA on when we would be back in the area and what truck stop we would be at, and told him we would meet up for a meal with him. This was really before the idea of having a cell phone for anything other than emergencies, so it wasn't like we could just call him when we were going to be in the area. He agreed, and we parted ways. My ex continued talking to him until the radios would no longer reach. We had finished our load and were heading back to Las Vegas to the truck stop we agreed on, and waited. Las Vegas is a shady place for truckers in general. Lots of crime, lots of bad stuff happens, so we waited in the truck. Finally, we got bored and ventured into truck stop for a bit. We waited, and eventually killed enough time where we could take another load, so we headed out. Never actually meeting up with him in Nevada, but a few months later, we ran into him in Oklahoma. We had heard some chatter on the radio about these lot lizards, truck stop hookers, getting brutally murdered at truck stops in Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Tennessee. But chalked it up to drama on the radio. After all, we had quite literally nothing better to do than to make up truck driving stories. We had kept hearing about it, and even brought it up to Maniac, and he just laughed and said it must be one real sick person doing it. It must be just a story, because if it was true, they would have caught him already. I bet he has even left fingerprints or something at the crime scene. With as bloody and messy as it was, I bet he wants to get caught. Seemed like a weird thing to say, but he was a very weird guy, so that was totally in character for him. Maniac went his way and we went ours, and after a while, I forgot about the weird comment. Fast forward to a few weeks later, we were in Mississippi, and we hear a familiar voice on the radio. It was Maniac. We had taken a long weekend because it was Labor Day and most companies were okay with drivers taking an extra day off. Our plan was make it to this lake out in the middle of nowhere. We were going to drop out trailer and head out to Bobtail. So we chatted, and he said he was heading to Tennessee and that he would be heading out the next morning. And so, cutting our much needed break short and bypassing the weekend at the lake, my ex decided to run with him so that there was someone to talk to. Our load was to deliver in North Carolina in a few days, so being a few hours ahead of the deadline just meant we would be at the top of the line to pick our load back. Win-win. We left that morning and headed out as the guys decided we would stop in Tennessee and finally, after about 6 months of chatting, meet each other. We weren't afraid to meet up with him, but I was still very on edge. Now I was no slouch. I grew up with 15 boys in the house and was a known fighter. My ex was a bigger dude, standing 6'3" and about 280 pounds. So in theory, we could take him if need be. The only way he could get the best of us was if he had a weapon, which back then was highly illegal to have in the trucks, and if you were caught by DOT, it was jail time, no questions asked. With our company, we had very specific fuel stations we could use to top off. Maniac was an owner-operator, so he could go anywhere. Maniac said he'd already stopped to get fuel and took a shower, but he would drop his trailer and meet us at a Flying J, a petrol station, that was down the road from where he was, which I believe was a Love's fuel station. So we get ready to fuel up. We showered and got a booth at the restaurant. We waited about 45 minutes before ordering food, and waited and waited. No one ever showed up, and there was no way to contact him. My ex was not a patient man, so we ate and then headed back to our truck. I remember it being dark and humid. It was probably 10 p.m. or so. There wasn't much for noise in this truck stop, which was unnerving. A quiet truck stop is a creepy truck stop. We walked across the fuel island to be greeted by flashing lights. It's not uncommon for either lizards to get busted or drivers to get involved in stuff they are not supposed to, so we didn't think much of it. Cops and a truck stop go hand in hand, but this was more than just your typical truck stop shenanigans. We passed 12 trucks or so. This was one of the bigger Flying J's, so it could probably fit about 80 trucks and trailers if you went all the way back to the dirt. And then you could Tetris a dozen or so trucks in the dirt lot, which happened to be where our truck was. Now I'm a curvy girl, not fat, but I don't look like I belong in a truck stop. I was used to drivers looking at me all creepy like. I always got taunted and harassed for being a lot lizard even though I was a driver. In fact, there are some truck stops that are not safe to walk in alone. I was walking with my ex and we weren't holding hands or anything, but it was obvious that I was with him. We walked down the row and saw a bobtail truck parked in the full parking spot. I thought it was weird. He was in a truck space with no trailer. Typically, bobtail trucks will park at the end of a run and leave the big spaces for trucks with trailers because that was again another unspoken truck driver rule. We moved by the bobtail truck. It was a dark truck, maybe dark black or blue, with a cattle guard and a brow. I don't remember seeing what type of truck it was, just that it was kind of menacing in the dark. Old school trucker code was if you were looking for company, the driver would park and leave his reading red light on to tell lot lizards that the driver was looking for entertainment. The guy was sitting in the passenger seat. He had the red reading light on so I could see his face. It was a little distorted, but he gave me the creepiest smile and then shut his blinds. We were about 6 trucks down from the bobtail. I could see his truck from ours. I remember looking back and seeing the red light still illuminating the porthole window in the passenger door, and a small slit down the curtain showed a dark spot. He was still watching us. Even with as warm as it was, chills shot up my spine, and I got a very uneasy feeling. My gut wrenched with a sudden feeling of dread. We finally got back to the truck and turned on the CB for our night entertainment and to see if we could radio Maniac to see what the deal was. The chatter was all about the cops and the ambulance and fire truck and DOT. All the commotion was basically across from us but 2 rows up. People were saying there was a dead lot lizard and that it was bad, like gnarly. One driver started trying to explain it, but he was then told that he had to keep his mouth shut by a police officer. Being the nosy people we are, my ex and I jumped out of the truck to go investigate. We dodged in and out of the trucks and managed to wiggle our way up to the scene. You know when you hear the phrase, "some things cannot be unseen"? This was one of them. The lady, what was left of her, had been tied to the trailer in the truck. Then someone pulled the kingpin, that piece that locks the two together, and let down the landing gear. The driver, who was now sitting in the back of a police car, cuffed, his head hung limp, with his forehead on the back of the seat. He was crying big heavy sobs and there was vomit on his shirt. We could hear them through the closed door, wailing that he had nothing to do with it and praying to God to be forgiven for what he had done. That poor driver had obviously not done his safety check before he left and just decided to pull out of his space, while she was attached. She got ripped apart, right in half. Without getting too graphic, I can tell you that a normal human body should never look like that, and it was like something you would probably see in the Saw movies. I remember stumbling back and bumping into another driver. He just looked at me, pale, and looked as if he was going to get sick. I don't do too well with that body function, so I moved quickly away from him and started making my way back to the truck. I was almost running back. I didn't care that I should have waited for my ex because he had the keys. I made it to the truck and tugged on the door, but it wouldn't open, so I ran to the truck stop at full speed. I was going to get sick and I would rather not have people see me. I passed the spot where the bobtail truck was parked and it was gone. My ex made it into the truck stop looking for me, and he said he would walk me back to the truck so I could get some sleep. Yeah, right, like I could sleep after seeing that. He turned on the radio and began to talk to the other drivers. No one had seen anything. There hadn't even been much lizard traffic. The police had been working overtime cleaning up the truck stops after they had caught wind of the first few murders. I sat in the bunk and just kind of stared out the windshield at the flashing lights. There was a tap on the door. A police officer said he was getting statements from everyone in the truck stop, giving us the rundown about safety in numbers and to not go anywhere alone. I wasn't planning on leaving the truck. I told him about the creepy guy that smiled at me in the bobtail truck and the description of the truck. The officer didn't see the point of me telling him about a creepy guy, but he took down the information anyway. I don't think I slept for days after that. I just kept seeing that image. Flashes kept going through my head. The vivid image of her face. She had a red rag in her mouth, and the 100-mile-per-hour tape around her wrist, tying her to the headache rack. She had obviously struggled because there were bruises formed on her stomach and her face. Mascara was running down her cheeks. And the smell, like rotted meat and blood, makes my stomach queasy just thinking about it. It didn't seem to faze my ex. He went on like it wasn't anything big or special. After a few weeks, I finally managed to get the image out of my head, or I had finally convinced myself that it wasn't real and it was just a scene from a horror movie. Either way, I was glad for the time being, having it out of my head. Fast forward, and it was February, about 3 months after that incident, and we were heading to New Orleans. I was super excited to see the area and hopefully get in to see the Mardi Gras. I wanted to see the cemeteries, to see the mausoleums, and to go into voodoo shops and such. We had a few extra hours to spend there, so I was happy when my ex said we could go wandering around. We parked at this little truck stop. It was one that didn't show up on the big Rand McNally maps. We were told about it by another driver. It really wasn't more than a hole-in-the-wall mom and pop shop with a small dirt lot and a flickering light pole on one end, but it was within walking distance of the French Quarter, which was where I wanted to go. "Hey there, Purple Pete. What brings you out this way?" The voice on the CB was loud, so he was really, really close. There was only 2 other trucks in the lot, an old Freightliner hauling a Swift trailer and a dark green Kenworth that had a cattle car on the back hauling cows. My ex was still a bit miffed about being stood up months ago. He could really hold a grudge when he wanted. "Maniac, hey man, where the hell have you been? Why did you stand us up there, good buddy?" My ex radioed back. "Oh man, you know how it is. Cops make me a bit uneasy and I'd rather not get fucking caught," he said with a chuckle. "Caught? What do you mean caught?" my ex questioned. "Don't worry about it. You just keep an eye on your girl. I'd really hate for something bad to happen to her, like all of those other girls," he trailed off. We watched the CB key up again, burying the needle on the radio. The signal was so high that it had to be in the same truck stop. There was silence. He was keyed up, but just kind of breathing into the mic. "You know, with all the bad things I've been doing in the truck stops, I like to play with the lizards before I torture them and destroy them. Those nasty sluts. They shouldn't be defiling themselves with the drugs and the sex like they do." It sounded like he was talking through gritted teeth. There was silence. His voice even louder this time. We could hear the rumble of a truck heading down the one-way street that ended in the truck stop. "Only God and the devil himself can judge me for all my sins. I will continue to rid this world of the diseased ones that plague humanity." We looked at each other. This was the only time I had ever seen anything like fear in my ex's eyes. Tears began to well up, and for the first time, I was scared. Like truly scared. A dust cloud came rolling up into the truck stop, and this dark black menacing Peterbilt with a cattle guard and a brow came rolling by slowly. The driver keyed up just as he went past the nose of our truck. It was that same creepy guy from the truck stop months ago. He smiled that disgusting smile at us and put the mic to his lips. "Be safe out there, Ninja Dwarf in Northern Exposure." His CB handle was pinstriped on his driver door. It said Maniac in bright red letters. In April of 2004, we headed back to Alaska because my ex's father had a massive heart attack. We stayed there for a while before heading back on the road. As far as I know, there were 7 total murders. There could have been more. Who knows how long he had actually been ridding the world of its sins. I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I can tell you one thing though. The second time around, I wasn't making friends with anyone on the road, and I always kept a 6-inch blade on me at all times, just in case I ever ran into Maniac. This happened a few years back. I was doing long haul, mostly cross-country routes, the kind that take you through vast stretches of nothing. You know the ones where the radio turns static for hours, and the only sign of life is the occasional pair of headlights going the other way, miles apart. I was young, eager for the miles, the money, didn't mind the solitude, or so I thought. The route I was on took me across a long, desolate stretch of highway that ran between the borders of 2 large governmental territories. I don't want to say exactly where, but think big, empty spaces, lots of trees, not much else. It was notorious among drivers for being a dead zone, no signal, no towns for hundreds of miles either side, and prone to weird weather. Most guys tried to hit it during daylight, but schedules are schedules. Mine had me crossing it deep in the night. I remember the feeling, utter blackness outside the sweep of my headlights, the kind of dark that feels like it's pressing in on the cab. The only sounds were the drone of the diesel engine, the hiss of the air brakes now and then, and the rhythmic thrum of the tires on asphalt. Hypnotic. Too hypnotic. I'd been driving for about 10 hours, with a short break a few states back. Coffee was wearing off. The dashboard lights were a dull green glow, comforting in a way, but also making the darkness outside seem even more absolute. My eyelids felt like they had lead weights attached. You fight it, you know? Slap your face, roll down the window for a blast of cold air, crank up whatever music you can find that hasn't dissolved into static. I was doing all of that. It must have been around 2 or 3 a.m. I was in that weird state where you're not quite asleep, but not fully awake either, like your brain is running on low power mode. The white lines on the road were starting to blur together, stretching and warping. Standard fatigue stuff. I remember blinking hard, trying to refocus. That's when I saw it, or thought that I saw it. Just a flicker at the edge of my headlights, on the right shoulder of the road. Small, low to the ground. For a split second, I registered a shape, vaguely human-like, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness as I passed. My first thought, deer, or a coyote, common enough. But it hadn't moved like an animal. It had been upright. My brain, sluggish as it was, tried to process it. Too small for an adult. Too still for an animal, startled by a rig. Then the logical part, the part that was still trying to keep me safe on the road, chimed in. You're tired, seeing things. It happens. And I almost accepted that. I really did. Shook my head, took a swig of lukewarm water from the bottle beside me, kept my eyes glued to the road ahead. The image, though, it kind of stuck. A small, upright shape, like a child. No way, I told myself. Out here? Middle of nowhere? Middle of the night? Impossible. Kids don't just wander around on interterritorial highways at 3 a.m. It had to be a trick of the light, a bush, my eyes playing games. I've seen weirder things born of exhaustion. Shadows that dance, trees that look like figures. It's part of the job when you're pushing limits. I drove on for maybe another 30 seconds, the image fading, my rational mind starting to win. Just a figment. Then, I glanced at my passenger side mirror, habit, always checking, and my blood went cold. Not just cold, it felt like it turned to slush. There, illuminated faintly by the red glow of my trailer lights receding into the distance, was the reflection of a small figure, standing on the shoulder of the road, exactly where I'd thought I'd seen something. It wasn't a bush, it wasn't a shadow, it was small, and it was definitely standing there, unmoving, as my truck pulled further and further away. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't fatigue, this was real. There was someone, something back there, and it looked tiny. Every instinct screamed at me, danger, wrong, keep going. But another voice, the one that makes us human, I suppose, whispered something else. A kid? Alone out here? What if they're hurt or lost? I fought with myself for a few seconds that stretched into an eternity. The image in the mirror was getting smaller, fainter. If I didn't act now, they'd be lost to the darkness again. God, the thought of leaving a child out there, if that's what it was. Against my better judgment, against that primal urge to just floor it, I made a decision. I slowed the rig, put the air brakes hissing like angry snakes, pulled over to the shoulder, the truck groaning in protest, put on my hazards, their rhythmic flashing cutting into the oppressive blackness. Then, I did what you're never supposed to do with a full trailer on a narrow shoulder. I started to reverse, slowly and carefully. My eyes flicking between the mirrors, trying to keep the trailer straight, trying to relocate that tiny figure. The crunch of gravel under the tires sounded unnaturally loud. It took a minute, maybe two, but it felt like an hour. The red glow of my taillights eventually washed over the spot again, and there it was. A kid. I stopped the truck so my cab was roughly alongside them, maybe 10 feet away. Switched on the high beams, hoping to get a better look, and also to make myself clearly visible as just a truck, not something else. The kid was small, really small. I'd guess maybe 6 or 7 years old. It's hard to tell in the glare. They were just standing there, on the very edge of the gravel shoulder, right where the trees began. The woods pressed in close on this stretch of road, tall dark pines and dense undergrowth that looked like a solid black wall just beyond the reach of my lights. The kid wasn't looking at me. They were facing sort of parallel to the road, just walking, slowly, like they were on a stroll, completely oblivious to the massive 18-wheeler that had just pulled up beside them, engine rumbling, lights blazing. They were wearing what looked like pajamas, thin, light-colored pajamas. In the chill of the night, no coat, no shoes that I could see. My mind reeled. This was wrong, so many levels of wrong. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was almost deafening, amplifying the crickets, the rustle of the leaves in the woods from the breeze I couldn't feel in the cab. My heart was still thumping, a weird mix of fear and adrenaline and a dawning sense of responsibility. I rolled down the window. The night air hit me, cold and damp, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. "Hey," I called out. My voice sounded hoarse, too loud in the quiet. "Hey, kid." No response. They just kept walking, one small bare foot in front of the other, at a pace that was taking them absolutely nowhere fast. Their head was down slightly, I couldn't see their face properly. "Kid, are you okay?" I tried again, louder this time. Slowly, so slowly, the kids stopped. They didn't turn their head fully, just sort of angled it a fraction, enough that I could see a pale silver cheek in the spill of my headlights, still not looking at me, still ignoring the multi-ton machine idling beside them. A prickle of unease ran down my spine, not the normal kind of unease. This was deeper, colder. Animals act weird sometimes, but kids? A lost kid should be scared, relieved, something. This was nothing. "What are you doing out here all alone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and friendly, like what you're supposed to do with a scared kid, even though this one didn't seem scared at all. "It's the middle of the night." Silence. Just the sound of their bare feet scuffling softly on the gravel as they took another step, then another, as if my presence was a minor inconvenience, a background noise they were choosing to ignore. This wasn't right. My internal alarm bells were clanging louder now. My hand hovered near the gear stick. Part of me wanted to slam it into drive and get the hell out of there, but the image of this tiny child alone, possibly in shock, I couldn't just leave, could I? "Where are your parents?" I pushed, my voice a bit sharper than I intended. "Are you lost?" Finally, the kids stopped walking completely. They turned their head, just a little more, still not looking directly at my cab, more towards the front of my truck, into the glare of the headlights. I could see their face a bit better now, pale, featureless in the harsh light, like a porcelain doll. Small, dark smudges that might have been eyes. No expression. None. Not fear, not sadness, not relief. Just blank. An unreadable slate. Then, a voice. Small and thin, like the rustle of dry leaves. "Lost." Just that one word. It hung in the air between us. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of concern. "Okay, lost. That's something I can deal with." "Okay, kid. Lost is okay. We can fix lost. Where do you live? Where are you going?" The kid finally, slowly, turned their head fully towards my cab, towards me. I still couldn't make out much detail in their face. The angle, the lights, something was obscuring it, keeping it in a sort of shadowy vagueness despite the headlights. But I could feel their gaze. It wasn't like a normal kid's look. There was a weight to it, an intensity that was deeply unsettling for such a small form. "Home," the kid said, that same thin, reedy voice, "trying to get home." "Right, home. Where is home?" I asked, leaning forward a bit, trying to project reassurance. "Is it near here? Did you wander off from a campsite? A car?" There were no campsites for miles. No broken down cars on the shoulder. I knew that. The kid didn't answer that question directly. Instead, they took a small step toward the truck, then another. My hand tensed on the door handle, ready to open. To offer, what, a ride? Shelter? I didn't know. "It's cold out here," I said, stating the obvious. "You should get in. We can get you warm, and I can call for help when we get to a spot with a signal." My CB was useless, just static. My phone had shown no service for the last hour. The kid stopped about 5 feet from my passenger door, still in that pale, thin pajama-like outfit, barefoot on the sharp gravel. They should be shivering, crying. They were doing neither. "Can you help me?" the kid asked. The voice was still small, but there was a different inflection to it now, less flat, a hint of something else. Pleading, maybe? "Yeah, of course I can help you," I said. "That's why I stopped. Where are your parents? How did you get here?" The kid tilted their head. A jerky, unnatural little movement. "They're waiting. At home." Okay, and where's home? Which direction? I gestured vaguely up and down the empty highway. The kid didn't point down the road. They made a small, subtle gesture with their head, a little nod toward the trees, towards the impenetrable darkness of the woods lining the hallway. In there, the kid said. My stomach clenched. In the woods? Your home is in the woods? Lost, the kid repeated, as if that explained everything. Trying to find the path. It's dark. Yeah, it's very dark, I agreed, my eyes scanning the tree line. It looked like a solid wall of black, no sign of any path, any habitation, just dense, old-growth forest, the kind of place you could get lost in for days, even in daylight. Can you come out? The kid asked. Helped me look. It's not far, I can't see it from here. Every rational thought in my head screamed no. Get out of the truck, in the middle of nowhere in the pitch dark with this strange child who wanted me to go into those woods? No, absolutely not. But the kid looked so small, so vulnerable. If there was even a tiny chance they were telling the truth, that their house was just a little way in, and they were genuinely lost. I don't think that's a good idea, buddy, I said, trying to sound gentle. It's dangerous in there at night, for both of us. Best thing is for you to hop in here with me. We'll drive until we get a signal and then we'll call the police, or the rangers. They can help you find your home properly. The kid just stood there, that blank, unreadable face fixed on me. But it's right there, they insisted, their voice a little more insistent now. Just a little way, I can almost see it. If you just step out, the light from your door would help. My skin was crawling. There was something profoundly wrong with this scenario. The way they were trying to coax me out, the lack of normal emotional response, the pajamas, the bare feet, the woods. I looked closer at the kid, trying to pierce that strange vagueness around their features. My headlights were bright, but it was like they absorbed the light rather than reflected it. Their eyes, I still couldn't really see their eyes, just dark hollows. I really think you should get in the truck, I said, my voice firmer now. It's warmer in here. We can figure it out together. The kid took another step closer. They were almost at my running board now. Please, they said, that reedy voice again. My leg hurts. I can't walk much further. If you could just help me a little, just to the path. My internal conflict was raging. My trucker instincts, honed by years of seeing weird stuff and hearing weirder stories at truck stops, were blaring warnings. But the human part, the part that saw a child in distress, was still there, still arguing. I was tired, so damn tired. Maybe I wasn't thinking straight. Maybe this is all some bizarre misunderstanding. I squinted, trying to see past the kid, towards the tree line they indicated. Was there a faint trail I was missing? A flicker of light deep in the woods? No, nothing. Just blackness. Solid, unyielding blackness. And then I saw it. It wasn't something I saw clearly at first. It was more like an anomaly. A disturbance in the darkness behind the kid. The kid was standing with their back mostly to the woods, facing my truck. Behind them, the darkness of the forest was absolute, or it should have been. But there was something connected to them. Something that stretched from the small of their back, under the thin pajama top, and disappeared into the deeper shadow of the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a weird shadow cast by my headlights, hitting them at an odd angle. Maybe a rope they were dragging, a piece of clothing snagged on a branch. I leaned forward, trying to get a clearer view. The kid was still talking, their voice a low, persistent murmur. It's not far. Please, just help me. I'm so cold. But I really wasn't listening to the words anymore. I was focused on that thing behind them. It wasn't a rope. It wasn't a shadow. It was a tube. A long, dark, thick tube. It seemed to emerge directly from the kid's lower back, impossibly seamlessly. It was dark matte, like a strip of the night itself given form, and it snaked away from the child, maybe 10-15 feet, before disappearing into the inky blackness between two thick pine trunks. It wasn't rigid, it seemed to have a slight, almost imperceptible flexibility, like a massive, sluggish umbilical cord made of shadow. It didn't reflect any light from my headlamps, it just absorbed it. My breath hitched in my throat. My blood, which had been cold before, now felt like it had frozen solid. This wasn't just wrong, this was impossible, unnatural. The kid was trying to coax me. "Are you going to help me? It's just there, you're so close." My voice, when I finally found it, was barely a whisper. I couldn't take my eyes off that appendage. "Kid, what is that? Behind you." The kid flinched. Not a big movement, just a tiny, almost imperceptible tightening of their small frame. Their head, which had been tilted pleadingly, straightened. The blackness on their face seemed to solidify. "What's what?" they asked. Their voice suddenly devoid of that pleading tone. It was flat again. "That thing," I stammered, pointing with a shaking finger. "Coming out of your back, going into the woods, what is that?" The kid didn't turn to look. They didn't need to. Their gaze, those dark, unseen eyes, bored into me. "It's nothing," they said. The voice was still small, but it had a new edge to it, a hardness. "You're seeing things. You're tired." They were using my own earlier rationalization against me. "No," I said, my voice gaining a tremor of conviction born of sheer terror. "No, I'm not. I see it. It's right there. It's connected to you." The kid was silent for a long moment. The only sound was the thumping of my own heart, so loud I was sure they could hear it. The crickets had stopped. The wind seemed to die down. An unnatural stillness fell over the scene. Then the kid's face began to change. It wasn't a dramatic movie monster transformation. It was far more subtle and far more terrifying. The blankness didn't leave, but it sharpened. The pale skin seemed to tighten over the bones. The areas where the eyes were, those dark smudges, seemed to deepen, to become more shadowed, more intense, and a flicker of something ancient and utterly alien passed across their features. It wasn't human anger. It was something older, colder, and infinitely more patient, now strained to its limit. The air in my cab suddenly felt thick, heavy, hard to breathe. "Just come out of the truck," the kid said. And the voice, oh God, the voice. It wasn't the small, reedy voice of a child anymore. It was deeper, resonant, with a strange grafting undertone like stones grinding together. It was coming from that small frame, but it was impossibly large, impossibly cold. It vibrated in my chest. "Come out now." The command was absolute. My hand, which had been hovering near the gear stick, now gripped it like a lifeline. My other hand fumbled for the ignition key, which I'd stupidly left in. "What are you?" I choked out, staring into the monstrous thing playing dress up in a child's form at the dark, pulsating tube that was its anchor to the shadows. The kid's head tilted again. That jerky, unnatural movement, the expression on its face, if you could call it that, was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance, contempt, like I was a particularly stupid insect it had failed to swat. Then it spoke, in that same terrible, resonant, grinding voice. The words it said burned into my memory, colder than any winter night. "Why?" it rasped, the sound seeming to scrape the inside of my skull. "The fuck are humans smarter now?" That was it, that one sentence. The sheer cosmic frustration in it, the implication of past encounters, of easier prey, the utter alien nature of it. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I reacted. Primal fear, the kind that bypasses all higher brain function, took over. My hand twisted the key. The diesel engine roared back to life. A sudden, violent explosion of sound in the horrifying stillness. The kid, the thing, actually recoiled. A small, jerky step back. The expression, that awful, tightened, ancient look, intensified. I slammed the gear stick into drive. My foot stomped on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning on the gravel for a terrifying second before they bit into the asphalt. I didn't look at it. I couldn't. I stared straight ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the whole cab vibrating around me. The truck surged forward, gaining speed with agonizing slowness. For a horrible moment, I imagined that tube thing whipping out, trying to snag the trailer, to pull me back, to drag me into those woods. I imagined that small figure, with its ancient, terrible voice, somehow keeping pace. I risked a glance in my driver's side mirror. It was standing there, on the shoulder, unmoving. The headlights of my departing truck cast its small silhouette into sharp relief, and behind it, the dark tube was still visible. A thick, obscene cord snaking back into the endless night of the forest. It didn't seem to be retracting or moving. It just was. The thing didn't pursue. It just stood and watched me go. And that, somehow, was almost worse. The sheer confidence, the patience, like it knew there would be others. Or maybe it was just annoyed that this particular attempt had failed. I drove. I didn't know for how long. I just drove. My foot was welded to the floor. The engine screamed. I watched the speedometer needle climb, far past any legal or safe limit for a rig that size on a road that dark. I didn't care. The image of that thing, that child shape with its dark umbilical to the woods, and that voice, that awful, grinding voice asking its horrifying question, was burned into the side of my eyelids. I must have driven for an hour, maybe more, at speeds that should have gotten me killed or arrested, before the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a bone-deep, shaking exhaustion. That was more profound than any fatigue I'd ever known. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely keep the wheel straight. Tears were streaming down my face, not from sadness, but from sheer, unadulterated terror and relief. When the first hint of dawn started to gray the eastern sky, and my phone finally beeped, indicating a signal bar of service, I pulled over at the first wide spot I could find. I practically fell out of the cab, vomiting onto the gravel until there was nothing but dry heaves. I sat there on the cold ground, shaking for a long time, watching the sun come up, trying to convince myself that it had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. The detail of that tube, the voice, the question, you don't hallucinate something that specific, that coherent, that utterly alien. I never reported it. Who would I report it to? What would I say? Officer, I saw a little kid who was actually an ancient cosmic horror tethered to the woods by a nightmare umbilical cord, and it got mad because I didn't want to be its dinner. They'd have locked me up, breathalyzed me, drug tested me, sent me for a psych eval. I finished that run on autopilot, dropped the load, drove my big rig back to the yard, and I quit. I told them I was burned out, needed a break. They tried to convince me to stay, offered me different routes, more pay. I just couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that kid, that tube, those woods. Every dark road felt like a trap. I found a local job, something that keeps me home at night. I don't drive in remote areas anymore if I can help it, especially not at night. I still have nightmares. Sometimes when I'm very tired, driving home late from somewhere, I'll see a flicker at the edge of my vision, on the side of the road, and my heart will try to beat its way out of my chest. I don't know what that thing was. An alien? A demon? Something else? Something that doesn't fit into our neat little categories? All I know is that it's out there, and it's patient, and it seems to have learned that its old tricks aren't as effective as they used to be. Why the fuck are humans smarter now? That question haunts me. It implies they weren't always. It implies that once upon a time we were easier, That maybe, just maybe, people like me, tired and alone on dark roads, used to just step out of the cab when asked and were never seen again. So if you're ever driving one of those long, lonely stretches of road, deep in the night, and you see something you can't explain, maybe just keep driving. Maybe being smarter now means knowing when not to stop, knowing when to ignore that little voice telling you to help, because what's asking for help might not be what it seems. Stay safe out there. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like, review, or a comment. As always, the original stories are linked down in the description below, and I claim no credit for the stories themselves. Be sure to follow the show everywhere at Scary But True Pod. And if you have your own scary story that you'd like me to share, email it to me at scarybutTruePod@gmail.com. My name is Michael Messerly, and I'll see you next time with more Scary But True.